women culturally have not been empowered by the conditioned systems to comfortably ask for what we want.
Hello and welcome back. Today we're chatting with Leisa Peterson, who I've known for many years. She's the founder of Wealth Clinic and the author of an Amazon bestseller, The Mindful Millionaire. Leisa left the advisor world to have a greater impact coaching people to unwind their money issues. And she's been quite successful as part of the FIRE community. Leisa, welcome to the Mindful Wealth podcast.
I'm so happy to be here.
Hi, Leisa. So the first question that I want to ask you is, tell us a little bit about your story. What is your journey through life that has led you to be sitting with us here today?
Big question. So the reason I'm sitting here today has a lot to do with the fact that I have been plagued by scarcity mindset much of my life. And if it weren't for scarcity mindset, I probably wouldn't have worked really, really hard in the first half of my life to build wealth. It wouldn't have been important to me, is the way I look at it. But because there wasn't very much growing up, I made a decision at a very young age, I think going back to like 8 years old, that I needed to figure this money thing out because my parents definitely didn't have it figured out. And I want to say the rest is history. I write about this in my book that by the age of 12, I had already figured out how to get a credit card at JCPenney's by lying about my age. And I got my mom to take me to a bank and get a checking account at 12. And within a year or so, I started having bigger savings accounts than they did. So it goes back really a long time. The good news is that I am no longer plagued by scarcity mindset. I have plenty to last for the rest of my life, not just because it's a dollar figure, but because I figured out that that was a problem that was really holding me back from living the life that I wanted to live. And yeah.
And so maybe you can just tell me a little bit like how that turns into kind of helping people, right? So it sounds like you have a really incredible backstory. I don't know anybody who really started worrying about money at 12. Okay. Wow. Okay. Interesting connection. But so how does that then turn into, you do your thing. I assume you spend a lot of time making your own money, but then somewhere that turns into helping other people. And so how did that happen?
I would probably break it into 3 phases that I went through in my life. I'm 55 now, and the first 30 years was all about me and having money and being safe and secure. In 1999, right around 31 years of age, unfortunately, I went through a really tragic thing with my father. Was killed, and it was very tragic and very sudden. And that was a turning point for me to realize that I had never been happy. I had made money my God. I was completely clueless of what it meant to live a life that was aligned with who I was, because I didn't even know who I was. And that led into another 13 years of me getting into meditation and self-realization and Buddhism for many years. And in that time, interesting enough, and I can only say this in reflection, but in that time, I was just trying to figure out, like, what is this thing called life? Is there any way that I could ever be happy? How does money relate to that? And how that looked in practical life is I looked like I was doing all the same stuff. I had my career, I had my, wealth building, because my husband and I have been building real estate and developing real estate for 30 years. I had that, I had my children, my relationship, my career. And then over here, I was meditating and teaching mindfulness and getting involved in this kind of subculture, but they didn't mix. And it wasn't until 2013 that I realized I couldn't live this fragmented life anymore. And it was only in that time that I was ready to go out at the level that I am now and say, I think I've learned some things that I could help other people with. And I'm just going to go make it up and figure it out. And so that started in 2014. So, yeah, does that make sense?
I love that. I hadn't heard that. I mean, I have heard that story. I didn't understand that trajectory and how you went from sort of internal to sort of an external focus. And it makes me feel better now that I know how old you are, because I'm 5 years behind you. And so I think I can catch up. I think I'm sort of on the same pace, because I brought, I did the same thing. I brought the finance and the mindfulness together just like 3 years ago. So, in 5 years, I'll be where you are, which feels good. I feel like I'm on the right path. So we talk a lot about true wealth. If you've listened to a prior episode, we talk about true wealth. Some call it success, some refer to it as well-being or fulfillment. What does true wealth mean to you?
True wealth to me is something that changes as I change. It shifts as I become the person that I think I'm here in this life to become. And so when I look back a few years ago, I would have given you a totally different definition of what that means. For me right now, true wealth is something that has a lot to do with choice and construction of what I'm giving my attention to, and is that in balance with my priorities and values. And it has a lot less to do about money, but 3 years ago, it had a lot more to do with money. And perhaps that I can't look at it in a vacuum of separating all the pieces out, but we have financially thrived over the past 3 or 4 years. And what's funny about it is it's overall, but looked like we weren't really making that much money. And so we've kind of reached this place where we're not really doing much, but it's actually growing in a bigger way. And we're not, it's just not important to us. It's kind of that dream that everybody hopes will happen. Like when you reach this place of abundance, it just starts happening and you're like, wow, that's amazing. So that's been a realization as well, that the less I focus on it, the less important it is, the more seems to come. And now it shifts me into, what's this legacy that's being created in the world through my actions of body, speech, and mind.
I mean, it's interesting that, as we move up Maslow's hierarchy, we sort of begin to take for granted those things at the foundation that other people are struggling to attain. And as we move up the hierarchy, as you say, our definitions of what wealth is change. Does that resonate, that idea?
Yeah. And simultaneous to all of this in the external world, there's so much happening inside of me, and understanding of who I want to be, and what wisdom is allowing me to, really fully be here, present in the moment. And so it's just fascinating, because the freedom that we gain, and this is why I think I'm such a proponent of women gaining wealth and gaining this empowerment, is that the freedom to choose the path that you take is enormous, and outside of just being worried about money all the time is so limiting, and I'm just constantly blown away at the possibilities that can come.
Go ahead.
Yes. Yeah. So, I actually have a few questions I want to ask, but I'll ask you the question that's on the script for the moment. So you kind of, mentioned this connection of women and wealth, and how that's kind of a theme that's important to you. This season of Mindful Wealth Podcast is about women and wealth. And maybe you can talk to us a little bit about how our fundamental processes and beliefs create the basis for a healthy financial mindset. And in your experience working with women, what do you think is the biggest challenge that we face specifically?
I'll start with that last part, and then you might have to bring me back. But what's coming really strong in this moment, and because I work with so many women who are trying to build wealth for themselves through business ownership, and it's not an easy journey for anyone, but I happen to focus a lot on those differences and the things that I see my male clients struggle, and the things that I see female clients struggle with differ. So one of the biggest things that comes up over and over again that is an obstacle until we see beyond it is this ability to ask for what we want. women culturally have not been empowered by the conditioned systems to comfortably ask for what we want. And it would be more of an exception. And there's tons of research about this. Like, I'm not just making this up. It's been done over and over. There's a book called Women Don't Ask, and they've got all the research in there. And so learning about these tendencies that we have, and then not being afraid to push ourselves into the uncomfortable zone and start to say, well, where is this showing up in my life? Is it with my clients? Is it with my financial advisor? Is it with my partner? Is it with my parents? You know, the list goes on. Being able to ask for what you want and stand in your own power, I think, is the turning point for someone to go from maybe a little bit of wealth building to a lot of wealth building.
Yeah, that's definitely like rings true for me. I think, you know, in my experiences of coaching and also like personal experiences. Maybe you can tell us just a little bit about the fundamental processes and that we go through and how our beliefs create a healthy financial mindset. Because that was like the other question that I kind of wanted to ask. Like, it sounds like you came from this intense experience of scarcity into what looks like abundance today, and you associate that with a mindset shift. So what does that actually look like on the ground?
Yeah, I can give you a direct example from a recent experience with a client, because it's hard to describe this, and I think it's way more helpful if we just get really specific. So a lot of the work that I do in one way, shape, or form is allowing people to have a breakthrough around what paradigm are they living in now that has prevented them from being able to build wealth. And if we can get to the core belief systems that are kind of holding them hostage in one way, and open up to the fact that this is not true. Maybe it was true when they were a child or in their 20s or even in their 30s, but it's not anymore. And it has a lot to do with forgiveness. So, I'll give you a specific, but then what happens is that ushers in the possibility that I don't need to be limited by this particular pattern or this paradigm anymore. In most situations, what has happened is both women and men have this, but again, I work with probably 85% women, so I see it a lot more. There has been a belief system that has caused this person to beat up on themselves, and they don't even know. It's the sea they swim in. It's the voice that's happening behind the scenes that comes out that says, you're really stupid about money. You've made repeated poor decisions about money. You name it. And what's funny is these are people that are like highly successful. You would never know that this is happening for them. And even when they hire me, I'm like, are we going to find something? Because they seem like so together, but they know that there's something that's not working, and they found their way to me. But when we get to these patterns and these ways that we're talking to ourselves about money or wealth building, or I should have done more for myself, I should have taken care of myself better in my 20s and 30s, and I wouldn't be in this situation. We offer forgiveness to the players, including ourselves, for what happened in the past and why it happened the way that it did. That we're always doing the best that we can. It's not personal. We take it personally. But when that falls, when that belief system and that paradigm falls, what I have seen is people are able to go out and create a completely different life for themselves, because that story is no longer a narrative. Maybe a little bit remnants, but it's no longer dictating their decisions, whether it be about investing or saving or asking for what they want. I mean, it shows up in a lot of different places, and it also helps us heal our relationships with other people, because oftentimes those money is affecting those relationships.
Just real quick, can I pull on it, Terry? Is it okay?
Yeah. Go, and then it's my turn.
Okay. So when you did your self intro, you talked about how you come out of, a deep sense of scarcity, and you said you no longer suffer from this. Mm-hmm. When you said that, that blew me away, because I don't know anyone that says they no longer. I say I come out of deep sense of scarcity, and it still has a hold on me today. I don't need to have that have a hold on me. I am way beyond it, and I know this intellectually, but emotionally, it still grabs me. So is this process that you're talking about, is this the process you went through to get rid of that? I mean, it sounds like a clean break, like you're no longer subject to it.
Yes. And keep in mind, I have been working on this quite, proactively for 23 years. But what I love about being a business owner is it literally lets nothing hide. And especially when you have a team of people and you are only as good as the person that you're showing up in these relationships with. And so what I would say is business ownership over this past 8 years has forced me to look at these areas. And sometimes they come up in business and sometimes they come up with my family. But where I noticed the biggest shift, and hold on to your hats, I mean, this is where it changes, is that if there is any manipulation or deceit inside of us of what we're going to get from other people, and that's leading the show, which is super unconscious, we're still living in scarcity. What am I going to get out of this person? What am I going to get? And it's so hard because, again, this is the water we swim in. This is what we think being a human is all about. Like, I do this for you, you do this for me. But the problem is there's so much stuff under the surface about need and getting, greed, but deceit is a better word for it because it's very, very hidden. Nobody ever knows what's going on inside of us. I love the idea that in the future, let's say 100 years from now, we all have the ability to read each other's thoughts. We couldn't live this way anymore. There would be no room for deceit because everything we think, everyone would know. And that would eradicate it pretty quickly. But I live my life as if everybody does know, or I try to. Like, that's because I see how different it changes. You are me, I am you. You know exactly what's happening right now, and transparency is everything. It doesn't mean that we can't co-create together, but if it's coming from a place that I get this and you get that, it's coming from a place of separation. Separation is scarcity.
Oh, it's so interesting. Jonathan, do you resonate with some of this, or does it like?
No, it's scary. I've actually recently discussed the idea of transactional relationships, right? So I think that's kind of what you're getting at is if we're always trading, and in all of our trading, we're trying to trade up, which is that is a sense of scarcity. That is what will I get out of this? And I think that I think you're right. I think that drives everything. And until we wake up to it, this is why we have, specific loving kindness meditations. So we put everyone on the same path, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I find this so interesting because maybe this is like, Jonathan and I, sometimes we talk about like our individual psychology and like what our little gremlins are, right? And I guess I just don't feel like I've had that experience of feeling scarcity towards financial resources. And as a result, like I find this fascinating, but I'm not able to like really kind of, I can intellectually hear what you're saying, but it's as if emotionally I've not had that experience. And so it's just so interesting to me that like people are experiencing that. And I think like it now makes me aware that like that's actually going on for people sometimes. And like if you don't know about it, you kind of aren't aware that it's going on. I don't know if that makes sense.
I wonder if this is a uniquely American thing.
Maybe. I mean, maybe.
What do you think, Leisa?
I think that we definitely have some cultural differences, and it is a block to spiritual development of people, we'll say in the West, but especially in the United States, where we act like everything is fine. And then there's this whole narrative behind the scenes that isn't being brought out into the open. And I think as a child, that bothered me a lot because I've always been that person, like, wear your heart on your sleeve, and I'm just showing up, and I'm more interested in expressing and being in connection with people than I am about hiding the parts of me that people might not like. Well, it's not that they don't like those things that I show. I've just gotten used to being divergent, if you will. I'm okay with that. But what used to throw me as a child in this culture is that people would show you one face and then do something behind the scenes completely different. And I just didn't understand that. And I feel like it's very embedded in the culture that we live in. And thankfully, I'm so grateful that I don't have it quite as prominent as it was when I was growing up, because it's difficult. You're like, I think we're in one place, but then I find out later we're somewhere else and nobody told me.
Go ahead.
No, Jonathan, I was going to say, I think I didn't even occur to me that this might be a cultural thing, but like, if I look at, you know, all those kind of economics reading that I've been doing in terms of like the US and how financial outcomes really like do condition a lot of things about your lives in a way that for us, they don't, you know, like we had an off-camera discussion about what going to college costs in the States versus, you know, for us, it's for a Canadian who goes to school in Canada, it's like whatever, $3,000-4,000 a year. Like it's not a lot of money, and it's accessible to, there's government grants for that. So it's accessible to everybody who has the desire to go, really. You know, not everybody comes from a household that's supportive of those decisions, but should you make that decision, like the world is not prohibiting you from doing it because of your financial means. And so I could see how, you know, the fact that your system, or even healthcare, right? The fact that your system runs in a different way means that those outcomes are just that much more important, right? Like us, even if you want to pay for like better service, you can't in the healthcare sphere. So we're all stuck with the same like subpar thing, but we all have access to it, you know?
Wow. So this could go on a total tangent.
Okay.
I'm going to try to bring us back a little bit. A tangent that I would love to have. Like I don't get me wrong. The idea of how by changing the cultural underpinnings, you could actually bring people closer and share success more broadly is, you know, I think that solves a lot of problems for us, but we're not going to solve them today. So, Leisa, you described these connections between self-worth, like historical self-worth, and current financial situation. Can you kind of unpack that? What is the relationship, the connection between how I feel about myself and my financial situation?
I think there's plenty of situations where they could be totally separate, but I'm just going to focus on those intersections that I've seen consistently when people have a low opinion of themselves. They, back to what we were talking about before, have a hard time standing on their own 2 feet and asking for what they want. And so that relationship between how I feel about myself, I consistently see it show up in what kind of careers we go into, what kind of business we start, what we ask for to be paid. And I think that it's super powerful to separate the two and realize that you could be on your own journey figuring out, you know, self-love or self-understanding, and you could actually have money be out here as more of like a game. You know, like what about separating them and say, well, what if I just asked for more? What if I just didn't think about it from that perspective, and I just got the nerve up, or I surrounded myself by people who think differently and I learn from them and I work on this journey separate. And I think this whole idea of connecting into and in back to the United States, there's this yardstick that also can happen where, based on how much money I have or the socioeconomic status I grew up in, or maybe I grew up in one and now I'm not in the same one that my parents were, like this yardstick to measure self value as a human because of how much money you have is very, very, very dangerous. I think it's far better to separate them and say, I've got 2 issues here, but I'm not going to allow them to indicate one way or the other that I think about myself. So kind of like a full circle thing.
I wonder if you could maybe tell us a little bit about your book, Mindful Millionaire. Why did you write the book, and what's not like other personal finance books?
There's a lot that's not like other personal finance books. So it's written for 2 audiences, which is, first of all, unusual. The first audience is like my parents, struggle with money all your life, and may or may not, even know how much problems it's causing, but like not as aware about money, let's say, but know that it's not working. And so you want to find a book that helps you get your head around like, what's happening here? Why has this not worked out for me? So those folks. It's also written for somebody like me who made money God and then woke up one day and said, goodness, please don't let me die with this twisted relationship that this is the most important thing in life. Like there's got to be more. So it took me 5 years and writing like 1 million words to condense down to, this book that would wake people up to their own relationship with themselves and notice where they get snagged along the way in their journey. And so it's not like any other finance book in that I teach about our relationship with money through the chakras. And the reason I did that was twofold. One, it's fun and it's like a different way of thinking about it, but also Maslow's hierarchy of needs was inspired by the chakra system. And it's not like some woo-woo pseudoscience. Like it's just basic. How do we mature as a human being? And it kind of goes through these different phases that we go through. And what I've found in working with thousands of people and their money stories is that we get trapped in these sort of time gaps in our own development. And those come out later in life in different ways in money. And so I just kind of created the different problems and pains that we suffer and connected them to a chakra. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. It's kind of silly sometimes. I was like, right before it came out, I was like, I think I might be crazy. Like everyone's going to think I'm crazy. And I'm a certified financial planner and I worked in money business for 30 years. And now I'm like entering a new phase where I'm so glad that people write to me and tell me about how it's changing their whole entire life, or couples read it together and they're like, I understand you. It all makes sense now. And it's really fun to bring a different perspective to this very serious thing called money.
What is a mindful millionaire? I mean, what's mindful is the modifier there. What does that mean?
It's probably changing again. To me today, the mindful millionaire is the person who's incredibly humble about the journey that they've had with money. They've built wealth, in some capacity for themselves, whatever. It's not the zeros, but it's this sense that I'm okay. I'm going to be okay. It's fine. I've got my resources. But what the mindfulness does is it changes the way we're thinking about money on the planet. It's changing, it's forcing us to ask the questions, where is, let's say you save up money, like where is that money going? Are you going to invest in things that destroy the planet? Are you going to invest in socially responsible and, investing? It's like, it's not for me to decide, but it causes us to ask those questions. What's happening with this money when you spend it, when you invest it, when you give it away? And does that feel mindful to you? Or does it just feel like what everybody else is doing? Because that's how you're going to make the most amount of money. But yeah, ask the questions.
Yeah, that sounds like good advice to me. Can you tell us a little bit about the I Prosper process and what you learned from clients working the process?
So I Prosper is, like we were saying before, it's inspired by the chakras. So it's an 8-step process, the first being intention, and then the 7 parts of how I see money playing out in people's lives. I wanted to give a framework for folks to go from start to finish, almost like rehearsing the life that you really want to be living, and give folks a way of thinking about that. So it takes you on the hero's journey is really what it's doing, through the past and into the future. And, I added some of the things that I learned as a financial planner towards the end, because it's like, okay, well, now what do you do with this? Like, we're going to look inside, we're going to see what's not working for you. And ultimately we're going to write a new story, and then we're going to have money come in and make better choices. And one of the things I love in the 7th step of the process is, as a financial advisor, you learn all these like nuances, like hundreds and hundreds of them. You're like, I don't know where to share these things. And so I finally got to share this stuff, like check out, getting, when your child turns 18, have them go sign a, authority, so that if anything happens to them, you have the ability to make decisions. And I'm forgetting the name of it, Jonathan, but I mean, these silly things that are super important. I got to list out everything, like a brain dump of, these are the things you should do as you're building wealth for yourself.
So one of the concepts that comes up over and over and over and over, and you brought it up earlier, is scarcity. In the book, you talk about tunneling. Can you describe how scarcity becomes tunneling and why that's problematic?
Yeah. So this is a term that was created by 2 professors who wrote a book called Scarcity. So I'm just explaining what they explain in their research. And that is that when we are captivated by the idea of not enough, so this could be not enough money, not enough resources, and I will even put it over like not enough love or attention, anything like that. The brain responds by, instead of, oh, there's all these other options, the brain responds by giving you a tunnel of only a few possible outcomes of the situation being presented. So it immediately shrinks your scope for making decisions. It also, they have tracked a loss of IQ, of like losing a full night's sleep. So 12 points, 13 points in IQ, just from being consumed by this thought of not enough. And if you remember when I talked about those paradigms, I think what I'm trying to do for folks is, I'm literally, in a couple hours of working with me, my goal is to find where have they tunneled, because that's what the paradigm is doing. It's only allowing them to see a few options. And typically when they come to me and they're saying what they think their possibilities are, I can see that they're only looking at this little lens. And I know that if we could do the work and they bust the paradigm, all of a sudden they're like, oh, the world is my oyster. Anything is possible. This is so fun. So we're taking them out of tunneling.
How does that shift come? Like, you're just, it sounds like they sort of have this aha moment, but are you Socratically asking them questions, or are you saying, hey, you're missing this and this and this? So what is that trend? What is that transition? How's that happen?
Yeah. Lots of different things. Questions. I have people answer a whole bunch of questions about their relationship with money, how their parents, mom thought of it, dad thought about it, or grandparents, what are the stories, who had money, who didn't, like all these questions. And a lot of them are in the Mindful Millionaire that I ask people. But when they give that back to me, I'm looking for the paradigms. And once I see it or come close, then when we meet in person, I can start to say, hey, tell me more about this, or tell me more about that. All along, I'm looking for the beliefs that I know aren't true, but they are really certain are true. And from that point, we can dive into a series of questions that allow them to see the construct of what's happened. Definitely involves forgiveness, oftentimes for self, for parents, for oppressors. A lot of times we're exploring the victim dynamic. It isn't therapy, and I've never been to a therapist, and I thankfully I've always used spiritual. I've used this sort of process in my own life and worked with other people who have taught me different strategies in it. But it's fast. It's quite simple when you've done hundreds and hundreds. Very inspired. If you know Byron Katie's work, she has 4 questions. It's all the same at the end of the day, but the point is that we run away. I think the reason it's hard to do this on ourselves is that we'll run away. It's the sea we're swimming in, and we'll get close and it's so uncomfortable, we'll run away. So my gift is to be like, I know you want to run, but I need you to stay. let's just go a little deeper into understanding what happened. And once we forgive, people, yeah, I think there's an art in being able to show people something and have them be like, oh, they're just automatically forgiving. I don't even have to ask it. They're like, I see it. Thank you. Yeah.
What strikes me as interesting here is we're watching narrative come back into things. We've had, 2 other episodes previously in the season where it was all about narrative, right? And the kind of stories people tell each other, tell themselves, sorry, not each other. But it's just interesting because I think, this comes up over and over again in terms of conditioning the outcomes that people have. And so it seems like there really is something there with narratives and people's relationships to their backstory.
For sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So let me ask another question. I think, there were certain trends that were already there pre-COVID, but I think COVID has done a lot to bring up more precarity for people, to widen some of those income gaps and some of the inequality that exists in society. And it's certainly put people into more uncertainty and more stress related to the predictability of things. And I wonder if you would have any advice for people who are facing these kind of stressful financial situations, or who have had their certainties or the predictability of things kind of turned on their head in the last few years.
I think in line with what we're talking about, the first thing is just to notice if you have tunnel vision about your situation. Are you stuck in kind of a loop that just keeps circling over and over again? You always end up the same place and you don't have a solution that it's appearing. Because again, I think this is where it's helpful to have people outside of yourself who aren't stuck in that same dynamic, who have a different perspective to communicate and connect. This is what's happening for me. And it's funny because this is the exact opposite of what our ego self wants to do. We want to hunker down and try and figure it out all by ourselves. But to me, the most important thing we can do, especially if it relates to money in any way, shape, or form, is to talk to other people. Going to Brene Brown's work, shame is the most debilitating emotion we can have. And if shame is activated, which it will be when people have big shifts in their situation, they might have trouble solving it on their own. So if you can get out of your shame and share it with someone and have somebody say, you're not alone in this, and this is so much of, I think, the communities that I build, is people are willing to come in and not maybe right at first, they kind of got to size it up, what's happening here. But when people start to hear vulnerable shares of this is what's happening and this is where I want to go and I'm not there yet, it's incredibly liberating. And it allows us to, start get into the present moment and start to think about what might look different. I'll add one other thing that we've learned. We could talk just about this as a podcast, but I'll plant a seed. I've been working with people in my company for 8 years in a lot of communities. And in 6 months ago, we integrated a process called Next Tiny Step. And because I was seeing people be super goal driven, and that's how our society is completely run, and it's ridiculous, and it's completely separate from being in the present moment. And we needed a process that would allow people to create without a goal driven matrix. Instead, what we show people how to do is how to focus on what is the next tiny step to move forward. And I didn't come up with this. We used a person by the name of Richard Ralston to show us what he had learned after working with thousands of people. And then we're adding our own flavor to it. It's kind of like a circling combined with accountability pods that are peer led. And it's a game changer. And as much trouble as we've had integrating it, I get why it's hard. Is we're rethinking all of the ways that we actually have held ourselves accountable to our goals and how destructive it can be.
I want to, as a follow-up question, and I don't know, whatever, I'm just going to ask it. It seems like everything you're saying presupposes a lot of that there is enough, and that it's all somehow internal, right? As if my position in society, as if meritocracy is a given. And I mean, when I look at things, I think the reality is that like the cards deck is stacked in a certain way, right? Like some people come into this world with more, some people come into this world with less. Then let's not even talk about race. This season's about gender. There's all ways in which we kind of come into the social hierarchy, the financial hierarchy in a different way. And to me, sometimes like talking just about, you know, abundance and changing what's going on in your own narrative doesn't necessarily account for the fact that the deck is stacked in particular ways. So I wonder if what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that there's no stacking, or do you think it's all kind of internal narrative, or like, what's your reaction?
It's a good question. You know, I can't change the situation of how I was raised. I'm a white woman, you know, in a country that is proven to, you know, have a lot of issues around racism that I'm very sensitive to. And I don't know all the ways that my privilege have affected my life. But I think I do have a slightly different perspective in that, coming from where I came from, which is the lower middle class in the United States, and then watching this transition being 100%, not, I mean, 100%, who am I showing up in my life? Like, that has been everything, because I'm going back to a reunion where I grew up in the Bay Area in a month, and I'm excited about it. But recently, you know, several people have passed away, and I'm watching this very hard living and the toll of hard living that I was exposed to growing up, and the toll it would have taken on me had I not broken out from a mindset perspective. And so I think you know, this is the world that I had to kind of learn, and I teach according to that. Interesting enough, we have a very diverse community of people that come to my work, and I think it's because I don't ignore the oppression or the systems or all these things that are stacked against us, but I won't let them stop us. I won't allow them to create a victim situation. I refuse to live that way. And I think that that's a shift that hasn't been easily won, because I spent I feel like at least 30, 40 years of my life as a victim. Yeah.
I wonder, just to, and not to change anything about the answer,
Yeah.
or to question anything there. I wonder if it's a choice of how we resolve that very, very difficult, true situation. And we could wait for the universe to resolve it, for things to become equal, for things to be fixed, and for governments to figure it out, and or we can take some of that and say, you know what, I'm not going to wait. I'm going to do it myself. And in order to do it myself, I have to have the mental acuity and the mental, you know, strength and the fortitude, and I've got to gird myself, and I've got to fight that battle. Right. And so what are those mental strengths, and how do we empower people that are on the losing end of the stack to then rise up? Like, how do we enable that? And I think that's, Leisa, I think that's the work that you're doing.
Yeah.
Better than I am. So,
well, I mean, the person who comes to mind to me in this moment and continuously is Nelson Mandela, and the idea of him going into this prison. And for many people, that would have been the end. But yet he came out of that experience a completely different person who went on to, you know, change thought at a minimum, you know, whether societies or what have you, that we are not going to change the world in the way, you know, Buddha said this, like, you can't cover the world with leather, so you put leather on your shoes. And I am, don't get me wrong, I get caught up in like all kinds of stuff, and my husband's like, oh my goodness, you know, because in the moment I can be very emotional about the things that are happening, but they're not the truth of my being. It's just like, ooh, this seems so real. And then I calm down and I see that I look at life like we're here. We've chosen to be on the human plane for the lessons that we can only get in this human experience. And, to go very spiritual, like, yeah, I mean, I was hearing somebody the other day, like, we live on this human experience where a lot of animals and humans have to kill other things to live. Like, we're not going to change that situation. But what we do with the difficulty and the hardship in this life is what I think I'm here for.
So just bringing some of the deck stacking to a question, I guess this is my role this season, is asking this question. Gender differences. I'm a guy, I have a daughter, I have women who work in the office with me, I'm married. What can I do to support your success, women's success generally? What are some of the things that I can do to help? Because it seems like, I don't know, this is not it's honest, right? Men have run things sometimes into the ground for a long time. And what can we do to bring some more parity to that?
What comes to me is listening. And I had something happen recently where I was caught in an old paradigm, and I'm glad it happened, but in the time when it was happening was very frustrating to me. And it actually played into this whole, I'll say now, deceit, where something was being handled as if I'm in a networking group. It's probably 65% men, but the group is dictated by men and the style is by men. And a lot of the women in the group will comment about things. And there was a situation and I was like, my feelings were kind of hurt. And I said it to one person and they demanded that I had to go to this other person, this guy. And I was like, I know how this goes. Like, I don't really feel good about it. I'd rather I'm going to work on me, just forgiving and letting it go. But he wouldn't let go of it. And so I went, I had to go to this person and tell him what happened. And it played out exactly like my worst fears, which was like, that's kind of stupid. And I was like, maybe it is. It's my feelings. And I was like, sometimes it's helpful to just listen and not treat women like they should be men. And my husband was the one who actually kind of helped me through it, because in that situation, it's okay that we're different. It's okay that we might have a different way of looking at something or working through something. And I don't know if there's any wisdom in it, but I learned a lot through the journey of being comfortable with the fact that sometimes I don't want to share something and I want to work on it privately. And other times, I'm also going to say I was really glad it got brought out because I learned some things about myself. So listening and honoring that we might have different ways of processing. Does that make any sense, Jonathan?
It does. It doesn't, just shut up, basically. Don't solve every problem is what I hear. Yeah.
No, or it's actually very funny, at least as you were telling that story, this also comes into the show a fair bit, so I have a sports life, and, in the gym, this will always happen. The women, the female athletes come to me and there's something's happened and they're not happy about it. And then they're working through it and they're like, do I go and talk to the head coach about it? Do I not talk to him? And then it plays out exactly how you said, because if they do go to talk to him, then it never really ends well. And it's just but he doesn't need to do anything. He just should, I could tell him, just listen and be like, okay, let's, go on. But that's not how it goes. Anyway.
Yeah, my husband, it was funny because I was caught in it. And he was like, you just need to say that you don't have to treat women like men all the time. It's okay if there's some differences here. And I was like, that makes so much sense. we're all the same, it's not one or the other, it's the both and
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
fun to just be able to be okay with all parts.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. Leisa, so we're coming to the end of our time. I want to thank you so much for having this very open conversation with us today, and being willing to go on all of our little tangents. So yeah, thank you for taking the time to talk to us today.
Thank you very much once again.
Thank you so much. Super fun.